The alarm on Marcus Chen's phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his actual alarm, a habit formed over 15 years of waking before the world did. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his modest three-bedroom house in Maplewood Estates, listening to the rain patter against the windows. 6 months ago, he'd installed the EV charger himself, a level 2 unit that hung on the east wall of his driveway like a technological sentinel. It had cost him $1,200 plus installation, an expense he'd justified by calculating the monthly savings on gas, roughly $85, give or take. His wife, Janet, had called it penny-wise, pound-foolish. She'd left 18 months ago for reasons that boiled down to Marcus's inability to live in the present moment. "You're always thinking about tomorrow," she'd said, not unkindly, while her suitcase sat open on their bed. "Never about today, never about us." The house had felt different since then, larger, colder, the kind of silence that accumulated. Marcus rolled out of bed, his knees cracking slightly. He was 51, a software engineer, the kind of invisible professional who made things work behind the scenes at companies he'd never actually visited in person. Remote work had its advantages. He'd been at Dataflow Solutions for 7 years, the last 4 entirely from his home office. His boss, Derek, had never seen him in anything but the collar-up portion of his work shirts during Zoom calls. The Tesla Model 3 sat in the driveway, already 87% charged. It would be fully charged by 6:15 a.m. He'd drive to the coffee shop on Hemlock Street, order a medium Americano, black, sit in the corner booth and work until the lunch crowd arrived. Then home, shower, another work block, dinner, usually something he could reheat or assemble without real cooking, and then he'd be back at his desk until 9 p.m. Tuesday would be identical to Monday. Wednesday would be identical to Tuesday. This was his life now, and it worked. It was clean, predictable, safe. He was in the shower when he heard the first car door slam. Marcus turned off the water, curious. The neighborhood didn't wake up for another hour. Most of his neighbors were the type who worked regular hours, left for offices, existed during the day in other places. He knew them by their cars: the Johnsons' silver Lexus, the Patels' Honda minivan, Tom's pickup truck with the tailgate that never quite closed properly. He wrapped a towel around his waist and walked to the bedroom window. A moving truck sat diagonally across from his house, partially blocking the driveway of the corner property, the place that had been empty since he'd moved in. It was a 1970s ranch-style home with ugly siding that looked like it had been updated in 1983 and left there ever since. The lawn was a minefield of dormant crabgrass. A realtor's sign had come down 3 weeks ago. As Marcus watched, a woman emerged from the moving truck. She was tall, around 40, with blonde hair pulled into a severe ponytail and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been told she was important and had internalized it completely. She wore athleisure, the kind that cost 3 times what actual athletic clothes did, and carried a tablet like a general carrying a battle plan. Behind her came a man, older, tired-looking, carrying boxes, a boyfriend or hired help. Marcus couldn't tell. The woman stopped in the middle of the empty driveway and turned in a slow circle, taking in the neighborhood with the expression of someone surveying a new kingdom. When her eyes passed over Marcus's house, she lingered for just a moment on the Tesla and the charger. He couldn't see her face clearly from this distance, but something about the angle of her head suggested she was making a mental note. Marcus had learned over 51 years and a failed marriage that moments like these were usually meaningless. Just a woman moving into a house, just a glance at a vehicle, nothing more. He dried off, got dressed, and went downstairs to make coffee. By 6:14 a.m., his Tesla was fully charged. He plugged it out, a simple gesture, as routine as taking the key from the ignition would have been on an old car, and pressed the button to retract the charging cable into the wall unit. The cable slid home with a soft click. The unit's light went from green to dark. Marcus got in the car, started the engine, a near-silent electric hum, and began to back out of the driveway. That's when the woman appeared. She came around the corner of her property in a power walk, tablet still in hand, and planted herself directly in his path. She put up one hand, palm out, authoritative, the universal gesture of someone used to being obeyed. Marcus stopped the car. He could have kept going, could have eased the car forward slowly, forcing her to move. But he didn't. He put the car in park and waited. The woman approached his window. He pressed the button to roll it down. "Hi," she said, and her voice had the kind of aggressive friendliness that made his stomach tighten. "I'm Karen. I just moved in on the corner." "Marcus," he said, keeping his voice neutral, pleasant. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thank you. Listen, I wanted to introduce myself and ask you about something that might be a problem." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts or perhaps her courage. "I was in my new garage, trying to get the space organized, and I noticed something. Your charger back there. It runs on the grid connection, right? From the house." "Yes," Marcus said. "The standard residential electric line." "So here's the thing," Karen said, and now her tone shifted to something approaching sympathy, as if she was about to deliver bad news he needed to hear. "I'm a commercial electrician, 15 years in the business. What I'm seeing is that your charger is pulling significant current, and I'm wondering, are you paying for that separately, or is it coming out of the standard residential rate?" This was not what Marcus had expected. He'd prepared himself for the usual neighbor small talk. The weather, the neighborhood, maybe a comment about property values. But Karen's question, while delivered with a veneer of concern, was pointed. "I pay my electric bill," Marcus said. "It's included in my total usage." "Right, but here's the thing," Karen said, and she moved closer to the window, her tablet suddenly extended toward him. On it was a diagram, professionally rendered, of an electrical grid system. A residential charger, especially one running at 240 volts with a 40-amp breaker, which is what you've got based on the size of your unit, that's drawing roughly 9,600 watts during charging. That's not cheap power to generate. And if your house was built when 50s, 60s. 1989, Marcus said. "Even worse," Karen said, and she actually grimaced. "Look, I'm not trying to be a pain here. I'm just saying that kind of load on an older electrical infrastructure, it's not great. It's putting strain on the grid in ways that the city isn't really accounting for yet. And I've seen situations where homeowners with chargers end up attracting attention from the utility company. Audits, rate reassessments. It can get messy." Marcus felt something cold slide into his chest. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Karen said, and now she sounded almost offended. "I'm warning you. There's a difference. I'm being a good neighbor. I've worked with enough municipalities to know that EV charger infrastructure is a gray area. The technology got ahead of the regulations. Your charger, when did you install it?" "6 months ago," Marcus said. "Did you get a permit?" "It's a residential installation. They don't require." "They do, actually," Karen said, and she tapped her tablet. "As of 2022, any dedicated circuit of over 30 amps requires a permit in this county. You've got a 40-amp breaker. You needed a permit. Did you file one?" Marcus said nothing. He hadn't filed a permit. He'd followed the manufacturer's instructions, watched 3 YouTube videos, and paid an electrician $300 to verify the installation was safe. The electrician had said everything was fine. "I didn't think so," Karen said, and she smiled, not unkindly but with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a puzzle. "Look, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not that kind of person, but I wanted you to know that I know, and I wanted to give you a chance to address it, if you know what I mean." "Address it how?" Marcus asked. "Well, you could file a permit retroactively. Pay the fee, do the inspection, all very standard, or you could remove the charger. But honestly, given the electrical configuration of your house, the permit fee isn't going to be cheap. I'd estimate probably $800 to $1,200, plus the inspection fee. And if the inspector finds anything else wrong with your electrical system while they're in there, and trust me, in houses from the 80s, they usually do, that could get expensive fast." Karen shrugged, as if the weight of this information wasn't something she was placing directly on his shoulders. "Or," she continued, "you could just keep charging, keep your head down, hope nobody notices. That's the path a lot of people take. I'm not judging. I'm just saying I know what I'm looking at, and I see a potential problem." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "You literally just moved in, you don't know me." "Because I'm a decent person," Karen said. "And because where I used to live, my neighbor installed a charger without a permit, it created an electrical issue that fried the transformer serving our whole block, and we all lost power for 3 days. Insurance wouldn't cover it because it was the homeowner's fault for doing unpermitted work. It cost my neighbor 40 grand to fix it. That's why I'm telling you, doing you a solid." She stepped back from the window and gave him a wave, actual fingers wiggling, like she was saying goodbye to a child. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Marcus said. Karen smiled, and it was a smile that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life to be right about something, and that moment had just arrived. Marcus drove to the coffee shop on Hemlock Street. He ordered his Americano black. He sat in his corner booth. He opened his laptop and pulled up the Dataflow Solutions work portal. His project status showed 3 tasks due by end of day: a code review, a bug fix on the legacy authentication system, and documentation for a new API endpoint. He stared at the screen without reading it. The thing about Marcus Chen was that he'd built his entire life on the principle of doing things correctly, following the rules, staying under the radar, making no waves. He'd filed his taxes, paid his insurance, maintained his property. He'd never been late on a payment. He'd never cheated on an exam. He'd been faithful to his wife until the moment she decided to leave, and then he'd been respectfully present during the divorce proceedings. And yet, he pulled out his phone and searched EV charger permit requirements Maplewood. The first result was from the county's website. The second result was from a homeowners forum, where someone had asked the exact same question. The answers varied. Some people said permits were unnecessary for residential installations under a certain amperage. Others said they were absolutely required and that the penalty for not having one was a fine of up to $1,000 per day until corrected. One post, dated 3 years ago, read, "I installed mine without a permit and nothing happened. Been charging for 2 years. If they were going to care, they would have sent someone by now." Another post, dated 2 years ago, read, "Got audited, fined $5,000, had to remove the charger. Buyer's market got worse. House ended up selling for $40K less than asking price. Don't risk it." Marcus closed his browser. He looked at his work tasks. He looked at the time, 6:47 a.m. He had 12 hours until he'd know if Karen was just an annoying neighbor or something worse. He opened his email and drafted a message to Derek, his boss, dealing with a minor personal situation this morning. Maybe slightly delayed on end-of-day deliverables. Will prioritize. Derek would not care. Derek never cared about anything except whether the code was good. Marcus hit send. Then he called the county building department. An automated voice told him to press 1 for permit inquiries. He pressed 1. Another automated voice told him his call would be answered in the order it was received, and current wait time was approximately 34 minutes. He waited, listening to terrible hold music, something that sounded like it had been composed by AI trained on elevator music from 1997. At the 31-minute mark, a human voice came on. "Building department, this is Stacy. How can I help you?" "Hi," Marcus said. "I'm calling about a residential EV charger installation. I want to verify the permit requirements." "One moment," Stacy said, and he heard typing. "What's your address?" He gave it to her. More typing. "Okay," Stacy said. "We have no permit on file for that address for an EV charger installation. Do you have one you need to reference?" "I installed one 6 months ago," Marcus said. "I didn't know a permit was required." "Yeah, they've been required since 2022, Stacy said, and her voice suggested she delivered this line approximately 6,000 times. "Any dedicated circuit over 30 amps needs a permit. It's a safety issue." "What's the process?" Marcus asked, "to get it after the fact?" "You'd file for a retroactive permit, pay the fee, that's $275, and schedule an inspection. The inspector will look at the installation, verify it meets code. If it does, they sign off. If it doesn't, you'll need to have an electrician fix it before final approval." "And how long does that take?" "Inspection usually happens within 2 weeks of filing. If it passes, you're done. If it doesn't, depends on what needs to be fixed." Marcus did the math. $275 permit fee, probably another $300, $500 if the electrician needed to come back out. Karen had lowballed it. "And if I don't file?" he asked. Stacy's tone shifted. She was now the voice of law and order. "Then you're in violation of county code. If the county finds out, and they find out through various ways, sometimes inspections, sometimes tips from neighbors, sometimes utility audits, you get fined. First violation is usually $500, 1000. If you don't correct it, that can escalate." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Tips from neighbors." "Yeah," Stacy said. "We get neighbor reports all the time. Someone sees an unpermitted deck or a pool without a fence, or in your case, an EV charger. They call us. We investigate." "How often do those tips come in?" Marcus asked. "For EV chargers specifically, I'd say maybe one every couple months, but they're increasing. A lot of people are installing them, and a lot of people are doing it wrong. He thanked Stacy and hung up. The coffee shop had filled up. Hipsters with laptops occupied most of the corner tables. A line stretched to the door. The espresso machine hissed and steamed like a dragon waking up. Marcus sat in the middle of all of it and felt completely alone. He had two choices as he saw it. He could file for the retroactive permit, pay the fee, hope the inspection passed, and move forward. That was the honest thing to do, the safe thing, the path of least resistance. Or he could do nothing. He could charge his car every night. He could hope that Karen was all talk, that she wouldn't actually call the county, that nobody would notice, that he could quietly exist in his house with his electric car and his remote job and his structured, predictable life, and that nothing would change. He pulled up his email and started a new message to a local electrician he'd never heard of before. "Hi, I need to schedule a home inspection of my EV charger installation to ensure it meets code. Can you do that today?" The electrician responded within 10 minutes. "I can stop by this afternoon around 2 p.m. Would that work?" Marcus confirmed, then he went back to work. By 1:47 p.m., he was showered, the house was tidy, and he was anxious in a way he hadn't been since his divorce proceedings began. The electrician, whose name was Brad, was younger than Marcus expected, maybe mid-30s, with tattoos creeping up his neck and a kind of aggressive competence that suggested he'd learned early on that the world respected people who knew their shit. Brad spent exactly 9 minutes examining the charger installation. "It's good," Brad said. "Clean work. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Code compliant. You'll pass inspection." "You're sure?" Marcus asked. "Completely," Brad said. "The only thing you're missing is the piece of paper that says someone official looked at it. The actual work, it's solid." "So I should file for a retroactive permit?" "Probably," Brad said. "I mean, technically you have to, but practically, if I were you, I'd weigh the fee against the risk of getting caught. Frankly, this neighborhood doesn't look like the type that gets visited by inspectors very often. Mostly new developments and commercial zones get attention. Older neighborhoods like this, they're pretty low priority." Brad was giving him permission to ignore the law, permission to take the risk. "I'll probably just file," Marcus said. "Your call," Brad said. He handed Marcus an invoice for $150. "Good luck with it." Marcus paid him and Brad left. Then Marcus sat alone in his house, his hand on his phone, staring at the county's website. The retroactive permit application was 3 clicks away. He had the money. He could do it right now. Instead, he called his lawyer. His lawyer was a woman named Patricia who'd handled his divorce. She was smart and direct and didn't believe in unnecessary conversation. "Marcus," she said when she answered, "you got divorced 18 months ago. What new catastrophe is upon us?" He explained the situation, the charger, the permit, Karen. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was her style. "File for the permit," she said when he finished. "Even though it'll cost money?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Patricia said, "because the alternative is significantly worse. If the county finds out about the violation, you're looking at fines, potentially having to remove the charger entirely and a black mark on your property record. When you try to sell this house, any buyer's inspector will note the violation. It becomes a negotiating point. And you say this woman just moved in? You think she's going to forget about this?" "No," Marcus said, "I don't think she will." "Then file the permit," Patricia said. "Make it right. It's $275. In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing." After he hung up, Marcus pulled up the permit application and filled it out. He paid the fee with his credit card. He scheduled the inspection for Thursday, 2 days away. Then he called the county back and asked if there was a way to see what tips had been reported about his address. "Tips are confidential," Stacy said. "We don't release that information." "So if someone reported me, I wouldn't know?" "Correct," Stacy said. "We just investigate based on the tip and determine if there's a violation." Marcus understood what she was saying. He wasn't being watched yet, but he could be, at any moment, and once he was watched, things would move quickly. He looked out his window at the Tesla in the driveway, at the charger mounted on the wall, at the corner property where Karen was probably unpacking boxes, probably making notes about all the little violations she'd noticed in the neighborhood. That was when Marcus made a decision that would, in ways he couldn't yet predict, change everything. He went to his office and pulled up the county's public record system. He searched for Corinne's address. Her property record appeared immediately. The house had been purchased 3 weeks ago by Corinne Mitchell, LLC, which was unusual. Why would an individual buy property through an LLC? Marcus clicked through to the property assessment. The house was valued at $380,000. According to the sale history, it had sold for $285,014 months ago. Corinne had bought it for $340,000. Either it had been significantly improved in the interim, or she'd bought it as an investment. Marcus pulled up more information. The previous owner had been an older gentleman named Harold Simmons. The owner before that had owned it for 8 years. Property tax increases had been steady, predictable, reflecting normal neighborhood appreciation. Then Corinne arrived, and the assessment jumped $45,000 in 3 weeks. He did a reverse lookup on her name and address. Corinne Mitchell appeared in 3 county records, her property purchase, a commercial electrician license issued 7 years ago, and a lawsuit. The lawsuit was from 4 years ago. Corinne Mitchell v. Northside Contractors, Inc., judgment. Corinne Mitchell, $42,000. Reason: breach of contract, failure to complete electrical work according to specifications. Marcus found another lawsuit from 6 years ago. Corinne Mitchell v. Sterling Properties, judgment. Negligence claim settled out of court, amount undisclosed. One more from 9 years ago. Corinne Mitchell v. Miller Electric Supply, judgment against Miller Electric, $18,000. So Corinne won lawsuits. Or more accurately, Corinne pursued lawsuits, and she did so with enough frequency and documentation that when she took someone to court, she tended to win. Marcus closed the browser and sat back in his chair. He had a permit inspection on Thursday. He would pass, he would be compliant, he would be safe. But something in his chest had shifted. Some small, cold thing that had been waiting a very long time for a reason to wake up. The day ended. Marcus ate dinner. He worked until 9 p.m. He set his alarm for 5:47 a.m. tomorrow. He went to bed. In the dark, he thought about Corinne, about her questions, about her warnings, about the way she'd positioned herself in his driveway like she owned it, like she owned him. And he thought about the fact that she'd been living in the neighborhood for less than 8 hours before she found something to be concerned about. He thought about the type of person who did that. The kind of person who looked for violations. The kind of person who knew how to weaponize them. The kind of person who'd be interested to know that her new neighbor had an unregistered EV charger. The inspection was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on Thursday. Marcus had taken the afternoon off, a rarity that he explained to Derek simply as personal matter, and spent the morning cleaning his garage, even though the inspector would only be looking at the electrical installation. He'd also moved the Tesla to the street. For some reason, he didn't want it visible during the inspection. He told himself it was because he wanted the inspector to focus on the charger without distraction, but the truth was more complicated. The truth was that having the car in the driveway felt like a confession, like proof of what he'd been doing. The inspector's name was Tom Michaels, and he was older, probably in his 60s, with the kind of efficient movements that suggested decades of knowing exactly how to do his job. "This your installation?" Tom asked, studying the charger. "I had it professionally installed," Marcus said, "though I supervised the work." Tom opened a small toolkit and started checking connections. He used a multimeter to verify voltage. He examined the breaker in the electrical panel. He traced the cable from the wall to the panel, making notes on a clipboard. The whole thing took about 12 minutes. "You're good," Tom said. "Installation is clean, proper gauge wiring. Breaker is correctly rated. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. No safety issues. You'll pass." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen. "That's great," he said. "How long before I get official sign-off?" "I'll file my report tonight," Tom said. "You should get your permit in the mail by Tuesday, then you're all good. You can charge to your heart's content." "No follow-up needed?" Marcus asked. "Nope," Tom said. "This is good work. I don't need to see it again." After Tom left, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and let himself feel something like relief. The permit would arrive. He'd be compliant. Corinne couldn't touch him. He pulled out his phone and texted, "Inspection passed. Clean bill of health." He'd sent it to Patricia, his lawyer, before he realized he was doing it. Patricia responded immediately, "Good, you made the right choice." That night, Marcus charged his car normally. He watched the charge percentage climb: 20%, 35%, 67%, 84%, 100%. The cable disconnected automatically when full. Everything was normal. He tried to work, but his concentration was fragmented. Every sound from the street made him look out the window. Every car that passed made him wonder if it was Karen, driving around looking for her next target. By Friday morning, Marcus had convinced himself that the whole thing would be forgotten. Karen had been a blip, an annoying neighbor with expertise and opinions, but just a neighbor. He'd done the right thing. He'd filed the permit. He'd pass inspection, and then everything would be fine. Friday afternoon, he heard the sirens. At first, he thought they were just passing through. The neighborhood wasn't far from a main road, and sirens weren't uncommon. But these sirens grew closer, louder. They stopped somewhere on the next block. Marcus went to the window. A fire truck was parked 2 properties down, at the home of the Patels, who had the Honda minivan. Firefighters were getting out, pulling equipment. A police car pulled up behind them. Marcus watched for 10 minutes, trying to understand what was happening. Then he decided to mind his own business and went back to work. By 6:30 p.m., the emergency vehicles were gone. He never did find out what the call was about. Saturday morning, he was woken by his phone ringing. Unknown number. He answered groggily, "Hello." "Mr. Chen," a female voice, official. "This is Officer Patricia Hands with the Maplewood Police Department. We received a complaint about your property, and I'd like to ask you some questions." Marcus's entire nervous system went into overdrive. "About what?" "About your electrical installation. Specifically, your EV charger. We received a report that you've installed it without a permit, and it may be drawing excessive current from the residential grid in a way that creates a hazard to the neighborhood." Marcus sat up in bed. The clock said 7:15 a.m. "I have a permit," he said. "I filed retroactively. The inspection was passed." "Can you verify that?" Officer Hands asked. "The permit should arrive Monday," Marcus said. "But the inspection was completed Thursday. The inspector, Tom Michaels, found no safety issues." A pause, papers shuffling. "I have a note here," Officer Hands said. "That says the permit application was filed this week, but there's no record of an inspection completion. The permit status shows pending inspection." Marcus's stomach twisted. "The inspection was Thursday, Tom Michaels. He came to my house." "I'm looking at the county records right now," Officer Hands said. "There's no inspection scheduled for your address until next Thursday, October 9th. "No," Marcus said. "He was here Thursday the 3rd. He spent about 15 minutes. He said I'd pass." "Mr. Chen, I'm going to need you to contact the county directly to clarify this. But based on the information I have, your charger remains unpermitted as of this moment. That means you're currently in violation of county code." "I filed for the permit," Marcus said, but his voice sounded small even to himself. "Filing and having approved are different things," Officer Hands said. "Until you have written approval from the county, the charger is operating illegally. I'm going to need you to cease using it immediately. No charging until you have official approval. Do you understand?" "Yes," Marcus said, "but I'm telling you the inspection was already done." "You may want to contact the county on Monday and verify that," Officer Hands said. "In the meantime, I'm documenting this call as a warning. Stop using the charger. If we receive another complaint and you're still charging, that becomes a citation with a fine." Officer Hands hung up. Marcus sat in bed, his phone still to his ear, and tried to understand what had just happened. He got up immediately and pulled up the county's website. He logged into his permit application. The status showed exactly what Officer Hands had said: pending inspection. Scheduled for Thursday, October 9th, 2:00 p.m. There was no record of Tom Michaels' visit, no inspection completion, nothing. Marcus's hands were shaking. He grabbed his phone and called the electrician who'd done the original installation. "Hey, Brad," he said when Brad answered. "It's Marcus Chen. You did my charger inspection on Thursday." "Yeah, man, what's up?" Brad asked. "I need you to send me documentation of that inspection," Marcus said. "Written verification that you inspected it, found it code compliant. Can you do that?" A pause. I did a quick look, Brad said. But I didn't do an official inspection. I'm a commercial electrician. I can't do official county inspections. That requires a certified home inspector or someone from the county. But you said it was good, Marcus said. Code compliant. It is, Brad said. But that's not the same as an official inspection. I told you that. You kind of just seemed to want reassurance, so I gave it to you. But I can't file any paperwork. I don't have that license for residential. After Marcus hung up, he sat on his bed for a long time without moving. He'd misunderstood, or he'd misinterpreted, or he'd heard what he wanted to hear because it was easier than dealing with the problem directly. Tom Michaels wasn't a home inspector. Tom Michaels was someone who worked for the county. Brad hadn't been sent by anyone official. Brad had just been a private electrician Marcus had called to give him peace of mind. And that peace of mind had been a lie. Marcus pulled up his browser and called the county's phone number again, even though it was Saturday and nobody would be in the office. The automated system confirmed that his permit was still pending. The inspection was scheduled for Thursday. If he wanted to reschedule, he could call Monday morning. He hung up and thought about the sequence of events. Brad had come Thursday afternoon. Brad had said the installation was fine. Brad had left. By Friday morning, a police officer was calling him based on a complaint. The only way that made sense was if Karen had called while Brad was still at the house. Had called and reported that an electrician was there, which might have prompted the county to move faster. Or Karen had called after Brad left, saying she'd seen an inspection happening. But there was no inspection happening. Brad wasn't a certified inspector. Which meant either Karen had gotten the county to respond to her complaint, and they were using the pending permit as leverage, or Karen had claimed that Marcus was creating a dangerous electrical situation, and they'd sent Tom Michaels out, and Tom had said it was fine, and Tom had filed his report saying it was fine, and somehow that report had disappeared. No, that was impossible. Records didn't just disappear. Unless Tom Michaels was never actually there. Unless Marcus had imagined the whole thing. He went to his computer and searched his email history. He looked for the conversation with Brad about the inspection. There it was, Thursday, 10:47 a.m., Brad confirming he could come at 2 p.m. Thursday, 3:15 p.m., Marcus paying the $150 invoice. Then nothing, no official county communication. No inspection report. Just Marcus assuming that Brad's visit had been the inspection and the county's records disagreeing. He pulled out his phone to call Brad back and ask exactly what he'd told people about seeing the installation. But before he could dial, his doorbell rang. Marcus went to the door and looked through the peephole. Karen stood on his porch, and she was smiling. He opened the door. "Hi, neighbor," Karen said. She was holding a casserole dish. "I made lasagna, housewarming gift from you to me. I thought it would be nice to bring something over as a gesture of community." "Karen," Marcus said, "did you call the police?" Her smile didn't change. "Call the police? Why would I do that?" "To report my charger." "Did someone report your charger?" Karen asked, and now her smile became something more specific. Something that contained satisfaction and something else, something that looked almost like hunger. "That's concerning. I hope you have everything properly permitted." "I filed a permit," Marcus said. "The inspection was Thursday." "Was it?" Karen asked. "That's funny because I called the county yesterday to ask about the status of your permit, and they said it's still pending." "You called the county about my permit?" Marcus asked. "I called about my own property," Karen said, "making sure my electrical systems were all in order, and while I had them on the phone, I asked about yours, just making conversation. Apparently, whoever you thought inspected it on Thursday didn't file any paperwork. The county said there's no record of inspection." Marcus understood what had happened. Brad, a private electrician, no official status, no authority to inspect anything. Karen had probably seen the truck in the driveway, had probably called the county to ask about whether someone was legally authorized to be there, and had probably learned that Brad had no business doing any official work. And then she'd called the police. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. "I'm not doing anything," Karen said. "I'm simply concerned about neighborhood safety, and you are currently in violation of county code. I'm being a good neighbor. I thought maybe you hadn't understood the severity of the situation. I wanted to give you a heads up. You called the police. I reported a safety violation, Karen said. That's what good neighbors do. You just moved here, Marcus said. How do you have the county's number memorized? I'm a commercial electrician, Karen said. I work with county codes all the time. I know who to call when there's an issue. She held out the lasagna dish. For the house, she said. Welcome to the neighborhood. Marcus didn't take it. Karen smiled and set it down on his porch. By the way, she said, you might want to consider the vehicle situation too. That Tesla in the driveway. The county's been pretty aggressive about making sure residential properties comply with the new EV tax incentives. You might not be eligible if your home doesn't meet certain efficiency standards. Just something to think about. She walked away back toward her house. Marcus stood in the doorway holding the lasagna and understood that Karen Mitchell wasn't just an annoying neighbor. She was someone who liked problems, who looked for them, who solved them in a way that involved leverage and information and an understanding of rules that could be weaponized. She was someone who'd seen his Charger and his Tesla and had decided, for reasons he didn't yet understand, that he was worth targeting. That night, Marcus didn't charge his car. He sat in his kitchen, the lasagna still on the counter, cold and untouched, and thought about what he knew about his new neighbor. She'd sued at least 3 different companies, and she'd won every time. She'd bought a house in his neighborhood and immediately begun investigating the people around her. She'd manufactured a situation where he thought he'd had an inspection when he hadn't. She'd called the police, and she'd enjoyed every second of it. Marcus opened his laptop and did something he'd never done before. He started building a file. Marcus worked through the weekend, compiling everything he could find about Karen Mitchell. It was easier than he expected because Karen had left a trail. Lawsuits were public record. Property purchases were public record. Even her commercial electrician license had a registry with complaints and disciplinary history. The lawsuits first. Between 2006 and 2022, Karen had been involved in 6 legal cases. 4 had been her suing someone else. 2 had been someone suing her. She won most of them. Case 1, 2006. Karen Mitchell v. Northside Contractors. Alleged, contractor failed to complete electrical work according to specifications. Karen claimed she'd paid $12,000 up front and the work was never properly completed. Judgment. In favor of Karen Mitchell, $24,000 awarded. The award was double what she'd allegedly paid, which suggested emotional damages or penalties. Case 2, 2009. Karen Mitchell v. Sterling Properties. Alleged, construction negligence. Property damage estimated at $8,000, settled out of court for undisclosed amount. The fact that it settled suggested Sterling wanted it to go away. Case 3, 2013. Karen Mitchell v. Miller Electric Supply. Alleged, breach of contract and material defect. Karen claimed she'd ordered specific electrical components and received inferior products that created a safety hazard. Judgment. In favor of Karen Mitchell, $18,000 awarded. Case 4, 2018. J&K Industries, Inc. v. Karen Mitchell. Alleged, Karen had submitted a bid for an industrial electrical job, been hired, and then refused to complete the work when the contract was revised to include new specifications. J&K claimed she'd walked away without justification and they had to hire a replacement contractor at significant expense. Judgment. In favor of J&K Industries, $31,000 awarded. Karen had to pay them. This was the only case she'd lost. The remaining 2 cases were old. One from 1999 where someone had sued her for property damage. No judgment found online, probably settled. And one from 2002 where she'd sued someone for unpaid invoices. One, $3,200. So Karen had a 12-year history of taking legal action, of being litigious, of seeing people and companies as opponents to be defeated. The property record was interesting. She'd bought her current house for $340,003 weeks ago. Before that, she'd owned a commercial property in an industrial zone. A warehouse space she'd bought 8 years ago for $210,000 and sold 2 years ago for $445,000. That was good money. Real estate appreciation that suggested either incredible luck or incredible judgment. The electrician license was current and had no complaints or disciplinary actions. She'd been certified for 7 years, which meant she'd gotten her license at around 33 years old, relatively late in a career. But the lack of complaints suggested she did good work. Marcus dug deeper. He found her LinkedIn profile, Karen Mitchell, commercial electrical contractor, 15 years in the business. Specializations: industrial electrical systems, code compliance, electrical safety auditing. Her profile picture showed a woman who looked directly at the camera with an expression of complete confidence. Marcus found a profile on the county contractor rating system, 4.8 stars out of 5, with 43 reviews. The negative reviews were interesting. She's competent but aggressive, wanted to overhaul our whole electrical system when we just needed one outlet fixed. Felt like she was looking for problems that weren't there. 3 stars. Did excellent work but charged top dollar and kept suggesting upgrades we didn't need. 4 stars. Professional but pushy about code compliance. We got a $2,000 bill we weren't expecting because she found violations in our system. 3 stars. So Karen had a pattern. She came in, she looked for problems, she found them or convinced people they existed, and then she positioned herself as the solution. In her professional work, this was valuable. She was thorough. She caught things other people missed. But in a neighborhood context, this was something else entirely. Monday morning, Marcus called the county and rescheduled his inspection for Tuesday instead of Thursday. The operator seemed surprised that he was rescheduling backward, but she did it without question. The inspector will be there between 1:00 and 3:00 p.m., she said. Then Marcus did something that surprised himself. He called Karen. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Marcus, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I wanted to let you know that I rescheduled my inspection," Marcus said, keeping his voice casual. "It's Tuesday now instead of Thursday. I just wanted to give you advance notice in case you heard anything from the county." "Oh," Karen said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "That's nice of you, though I'm not sure why the county would contact me about your inspection." "You seemed interested in the status," Marcus said. "I thought you'd want to know it was moving forward." "I appreciate that," Karen said. "And hey, when it passes, and I'm sure it will, your installation looks fine. Maybe we can have a real conversation about neighborhood safety moving forward. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot." "We did," Marcus agreed. "I'd like that." After he hung up, he sat with what he'd just done. He'd called the woman who'd reported him to the police and told her his inspection was coming. Why had he done that? Because he wanted her to know. He wanted her to understand that he was moving forward, that he wasn't panicking, that he was handling it correctly. He wanted her to understand that he was paying attention. Tuesday came. The inspector, a different one this time, a younger woman named Rebecca Chen, no relation, though they joked about it, came at 1:45 p.m. She spent 20 minutes examining the installation, asked Marcus detailed questions about the installation process and the electrician who'd done it, and at the end, handed him a work completion form that was already signed. "You're approved," Rebecca said. "I'm filing this today. Your permit will be in the mail by end of the week. You're officially compliant." After she left, Marcus stood in his driveway and plugged in the Tesla. The charge cable extended from the wall unit. The light turned green. The car began charging. He stood there for 10 minutes, watching electricity flow into his vehicle. Then he unplugged it and went inside to call Officer Hands. "Officer Hands, this is Marcus Chen. You called me on Saturday about my EV charger." "Yes, Mr. Chen, how can I help?" "My inspection was completed this afternoon," Marcus said. "The inspector passed my installation. I should have official permit documentation by the end of the week. I wanted to let you know that the violation has been resolved." "That's good news," Officer Hands said. "We'll update our records. You're all set." After he hung up, Marcus made one more call. He called the county's public records department and requested a copy of the complaint that had been filed against him. The clerk on the phone explained that complaints could be made anonymously and that the county didn't always retain detailed complaint information, but that she could check what was in the system. After a 5-minute hold, she came back. "I have a report filed Friday, October 3rd at 4:15 p.m. reporting that you had an unlicensed electrician at your property conducting electrical work without a permit. The complainant's name was not recorded." "How would the county even know my address from that complaint?" Marcus asked. "They'd need to know the address," the clerk said. Or they'd need to know your name and be able to look up your address from county records. Which meant Karen had given them something, an address, a name, something specific. "Is there anything else on file about this complaint?" Marcus asked. "No," the clerk said. "Just the initial report. Since your permit application filed later that week and the installation passed inspection, the complaint was marked as resolved." Marcus thanked her and hung up. The permit arrived on Friday, as promised. It was a thick envelope with official county seals and forms in triplicate and a big green, approved, stamp on the main document. Marcus opened his front door and found Karen standing on his porch. "Congratulations," she said. "I heard from the county that your inspection passed. That's wonderful." "You heard from the county?" Marcus asked. "I called to follow up," Karen said. "Just being a good neighbor, making sure you were handling it correctly. I'm glad it all worked out. And hey, I wanted to apologize for how I handled things at first. I came on too strong. That's a weakness of mine. I see a problem and I attack it immediately. I'm working on that." She was smiling. She was apologizing. She was being gracious in victory. "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "So we're good?" Karen asked. "Just two neighbors who got off on the wrong foot but figured it out." "Sure," Marcus said. "We're good." After Karen left, Marcus stood in his kitchen and experienced a clarifying moment. Karen had done this on purpose, all of it. She'd seen the charger, she'd investigated him, she'd found a vulnerability, and she'd exploited it. But she'd exploited it in a way that was technically legal. She'd called the authorities. She'd reported a violation. Everything she'd done had been within the bounds of the law. And yet it had felt like an attack. It had felt personal. It had felt like she'd decided he was someone worth targeting and had followed through until she'd made his life difficult. And now she was being gracious about it because she'd won. She'd made her point. She'd shown him that she could, and now she could afford to be nice because the power dynamic was clear. Marcus understood in that moment what Karen was. She was someone who needed to win, who needed to feel superior, who needed to demonstrate her competence and her knowledge and her authority. And she did this by finding problems, real or exaggerated, and then positioning herself as the expert who could solve them. With people like the contractors she'd sued, she had leverage, money they owed her, work they'd done badly. With Marcus, she had what? The fact that he'd made a mistake, the fact that he'd trusted someone without verifying they had the right credentials. But he'd fixed it. He'd done everything correctly. He had his permit, the charger was approved, he was compliant. Which meant Karen's real victory wasn't about the charger at all. It was about fear. She'd made Marcus afraid. She demonstrated that she was watching, that she knew things, that she could cause him problems. And that fear, that awareness that she was out there watching, evaluating, that was the actual weapon. Marcus sat down with his laptop and opened the file he'd been compiling about Karen. Then he began to add to it, not information about her lawsuits or her property, but information about her weakness. He called the county and got the name of the Commercial Electrician Licensing Board. He pulled up the board's website and found the complaint process. He read through Karen's license profile again and found something he'd missed before. A note that said, "Previous disciplinary action. 2016, violation of Code 4732, unauthorized inspection of third-party electrical systems." Marcus clicked deeper and found the case file. In 2016, Karen had been audited by the licensing board because she'd conducted what amounted to a professional electrical inspection at a property she didn't own without the explicit permission of the property owner or their agent. The homeowner had complained that Karen had come to their property with a contractor doing work and had inspected their entire electrical system without asking, then sent them a list of violations that needed to be fixed, implying that if they weren't, the property would be unsafe. The licensing board had found that Karen had acted outside the scope of appropriate professional conduct, but hadn't revoked her license. They'd issued a warning and required her to take additional training on professional ethics. So Karen had been disciplined before for essentially doing what she'd done to Marcus, using her expertise and knowledge to create fear and make herself seem necessary. And in 2016, someone had reported her. Marcus made a note of this. Then he opened his browser and searched, "Karen Mitchell Commercial Electrician Ethics Complaint 2024. Nothing came up. He searched, Corinne Mitchell Electrical License Violation 2024. Nothing. He searched Corinne Mitchell Maplewood Contractor. She had a website, a professional website with testimonials and before and after pictures of electrical installations. It was sleek and professional and designed to make her seem competent and trustworthy. Marcus took screenshots of everything. Then he thought about what he wanted to do. He could file a complaint with the licensing board. He could report her for harassment. He could claim she'd abused her professional status to intimidate him. The 2016 disciplinary action would give his complaint credibility. He could do all of that. Or he could do something else. Marcus closed the laptop and went to his driveway. He plugged in the Tesla. The charger hummed to life, the cable extended, the light turned green. He stood there watching electricity flow into his car, and he smiled. Corinne Mitchell had made a critical mistake. She'd shown him how she operated. And now he knew exactly how to fight back. The weeks after the permit approval were quiet in a way that felt intentional. Marcus charged his car every night. He went to the coffee shop. He worked from his home office. He existed in his predictable routine. But now there was something underneath it, a current of attention and planning that had been absent before. He found out through the county records website that Corinne had filed permits for extensive renovations to her house. New roofing, new electrical panel, interesting, given her background, new HVAC system. The total permitted work was valued at over $80,000. He found that she'd hired 3 different contractors, a roofing company called Superior Slate and Tile, an electrician he didn't recognize, and an HVAC company called Climate Comfort Systems. He pulled the addresses of these companies from the permits and visited them in person. Superior Slate and Tile was on the north side of town, an older building with a showroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Marcus walked in, and a woman at the desk asked if he needed help. "I'm looking for information about Corinne Mitchell," Marcus said. "She's having some roof work done. I'm a potential customer, and I wanted to ask about her experience as a client." The woman's face changed, went carefully neutral. "You want to know about Corinne Mitchell?" she asked. "If that's not a problem," Marcus said. The woman called toward the back. "Danny, you got a minute?" A man emerged from the back office. He was older, weathered-looking, the kind of man who'd spent his career on roofs and in the sun. "This gentleman's asking about our experience with Corinne Mitchell," the woman said. Danny's jaw tightened. "What about her?" he asked. "I'm considering hearing her for some work," Marcus said, which was a lie. "I wanted to know how she was to work with." "She's a contractor?" Danny asked, skeptical. "Commercial electrician," Marcus said. Danny and the woman exchanged a look. "We're doing some roofing work for her," Danny said carefully. "The job's been detailed. She's very particular about specifications." "Is that a problem?" Marcus asked. "Depends on how you feel about change orders," Danny said. "We bid a job, she says it needs to be bigger or different or more extensive. Every time there's new requirements. Every time the cost goes up." "But the work gets done." "Yeah, the work gets done," Danny said. "And it gets done well, but she's the type to find a problem in perfect work and demand it be fixed. She had us come back 4 times on the roofing because she said the pitch wasn't right. Pitch was correct. We had 2 different inspectors verify. She still made us come back." Marcus made mental notes of this. He visited the Climate Comfort Systems office the next day and got a similar story. The HVAC company had been working on her system for 3 weeks when Marcus visited. The owner, a man named Phil, was frustrated but trying to hide it. "She's very thorough," Phil said when Marcus asked about Corinne. "Very particular about temperature specifications, very particular about noise levels, very particular about whether the system is meeting efficiency standards." "Is any of that unreasonable?" Marcus asked. "No," Phil said. "It's all reasonable, but it's a level of attention that most people don't require. It makes the job longer, and longer jobs cost more. We've already had 3 separate service calls for adjustments. 3. Most people call once, we fix whatever issue they have, we're done." The third contractor, the electrician Corinne had hired, was harder to track down. The name on the permit was JAK Electrical Services, which turned out to be a sole proprietor named James Keller. His office was a converted garage in a residential neighborhood. Marcus called and got voicemail. He didn't leave a message, but he made note of the name. October became November. The weather turned. Marcus bought heavier jackets and started the coffee shop routine earlier in the mornings while it was still dark outside. He didn't see Karen much. She was busy with her renovations. Her driveway was often occupied by contractor vehicles. Dumpsters appeared periodically as old materials were hauled away. She waved at Marcus once when they both happened to be getting mail from the mailbox at the same time, and he waved back, and that was the extent of their interaction. But Marcus was watching, nodding everything. The roofing work seemed to take twice as long as planned. The HVAC work continued past the estimated completion date. The electrical work, the new panel installation, happened on a Thursday, and Marcus watched from his window as JAK Electrical Services arrived. A single electrician got out of the van. Young, maybe early 30s. He carried his tools in and didn't come back out for 4 hours. When he left, Karen was walking him out to his van, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the interaction. The electrician looked tired. Karen was talking, gesturing, pointing at something. The next Monday, JAK Electrical Services came back. Same electrician, same van. 3 more hours in the house. Tuesday, they returned again. By Thursday, Marcus counted 5 separate visits from JAK Electrical in less than 2 weeks. He searched online and found JAK Electrical's website. Decent work, good reviews, mid-range pricing. The owner's picture showed James Keller. Young-looking, friendly-seeming, the kind of contractor who'd probably built his business on reliability and word of mouth. Marcus sent him an email. "Hi, James. I saw your company doing work in our neighborhood, and I'm looking for electrical services. Could you send me a quote for a residential panel upgrade?" James responded within an hour with a quote template and a request for details about the current panel and desired upgrades. Marcus responded that he'd get back to him. He never did. He just wanted to establish contact. By mid-November, the contractor visits slowed. The roofing work completed. The HVAC appeared to be finished, though Marcus saw the company return once more for what looked like a final inspection. The electrical work lingered the longest, with JAK Electrical coming back sporadically throughout November. Then, in the first week of December, the inspection happened. A county inspector arrived on a gray Thursday morning. Marcus watched from his window as the inspector, a man he didn't recognize, went into Karen's house. He was in there for 40 minutes. When he came out, he was holding a clipboard with papers clipped to it. Karen was following him, talking, gesturing, pointing to various things on the exterior of the house. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the pattern. Karen was talking more than the inspector was. Karen was animated. The inspector was writing things down. The inspector's face was not friendly. After the inspector left, Karen stood in her driveway for a long time, very still, staring at the papers he'd left with her. Then she got her phone out and started making calls. Marcus watched for 10 minutes as Karen paced her driveway, phone to her ear, having what appeared to be increasingly intense conversations with multiple people. That evening, Marcus did a public records search for Karen's address and inspection. He found it immediately, a certificate of occupancy denial. The permit for electrical work had been inspected and found to have violations. Specific violations: improper installation of new electrical panel, inadequate grounding, panel capacity not rated for the load requirements indicated in the work specifications. The inspector had noted that the work would need to be corrected before final approval could be granted. Marcus smiled. He pulled up his notes on JAK Electrical and the number of visits James Keller had made to Karen's house. 5 visits in 2 weeks, multiple return trips, signs of ongoing problems and corrections. Karen had found problems. She'd demanded fixes. She'd pushed for a certain standard, and the electrician working under those conditions had made mistakes. Or perhaps Karen had demanded things that were unreasonable, and James had tried to accommodate them, and in accommodating them, he'd created violations. Either way, the inspection had failed. Marcus opened his email and started typing to James Keller. "Hi, James, I had a question about your services. A neighbor of mine had some electrical work done recently, and the county inspector found violations. I was wondering, if a homeowner is demanding specific things that might not be within code, how do you handle that situation? James responded the next morning. That's a great question. I always make sure the homeowner understands that I follow code first, their preferences second. If someone asks me to do something that violates code, I explain why it's not possible and offer alternatives that are code compliant. Sometimes homeowners don't like that answer and there's a dispute, but I won't do work that violates code, too much liability. Marcus responded, what if the homeowner keeps insisting? What if they're very knowledgeable about electrical systems and they're sure they're right? James took longer to respond this time. When he did, then we have a problem. I've had that situation before. Sometimes I walk away from the job, sometimes we negotiate. Sometimes the homeowner goes elsewhere and finds someone who will do the work their way. That person usually has a lower license rating and less insurance, and usually that person's work ends up failing inspection. Marcus closed the email. He had what he needed. He created a new email account, something anonymous and impossible to trace back to him, and sent an email to the county building department. I wanted to report a safety concern. A homeowner on Oak Ridge Drive has recently had electrical work done, and the inspector found violations on the certificate of occupancy. However, I'm concerned that those violations may not be due to poor work by the contractor, but rather due to homeowner demands that push the contractor to violate code. The homeowner is a commercial electrician who likely knew that the specifications she requested violated code. I wanted to alert the county in case there are a pattern of this behavior, particularly given that this homeowner has a disciplinary history with the state licensing board. The homeowner's name is Corinne Mitchell. Address her address. The contractor is JAK Electrical Services, owner James Keller. The contractor should not be blamed for violations that resulted from unreasonable homeowner demands. He sent it from a coffee shop, using the public Wi-Fi from the anonymous email account. Then he deleted the account and went home. 2 weeks later, Marcus was at the coffee shop when his phone buzzed with a notification from the county building department. It was a generic notice, Certificate of Occupancy Status Update. The notice indicated that the violation on Corinne Mitchell's address had been investigated further, and the county had determined that the violations may have resulted from miscommunication between homeowner and contractor regarding code compliance. The notice further indicated that the contractor, JAK Electrical Services, had submitted documentation showing that the homeowner had requested specifications that violated code, and that the contractor had warned the homeowner of this fact multiple times before proceeding. The violation remained on the certificate of occupancy. The work would need to be corrected by a licensed electrician, but the notice exonerated James Keller. It also created a permanent record of Corinne having demanded violations. Marcus closed the notice and sipped his coffee. He thought about Corinne Mitchell, who liked to win, who liked to find problems, who liked to demonstrate her competence by identifying solutions. And he thought about what happened when someone like that encountered a problem that was actually her fault. That evening, Marcus drove past Corinne's house. Her driveway was empty, no contractor vehicles, no activity, just a house that was undergoing renovations and had just failed inspection. Marcus pulled into his driveway and plugged in his Tesla. The charger hummed to life. The cable extended. The light turned green. He'd won this round. But more importantly, he'd learned something. He'd learned how to fight people like Corinne. And he understood in a way that felt almost certain that this wasn't over. Corinne would try again, would find another angle, would come after him again because people like her didn't just accept defeat. They adapted and tried again. And when she did, Marcus would be ready. Part 5, Thanksgiving. Marcus's mother called on Thanksgiving morning. "Mom," he said, picking up, "Happy Thanksgiving." "Happy Thanksgiving, honey," his mother said. She was in Portland, living in a retirement community, living a life that had completely separated from his after his divorce. "How are you doing?" "Good," Marcus said, "working on dinner." "You're cooking?" His mother sounded surprised. "Nothing major," Marcus said. "Turkey, some sides, keeping it simple." "That's nice," his mother said, and he could hear the sadness in her voice. She wanted to ask about Janet. She wanted to know if he was okay being alone. She wanted to believe her son was thriving, not just surviving. "It's fine, Mom," he said. "I'm fine." After they hung up, Marcus went back to the kitchen. He'd bought a small turkey, just under 6 pounds, the right size for one person. He'd prepared it the night before, rubbed it with butter and herbs, let it sit in the refrigerator overnight. This was the first Thanksgiving without Janet. The first one where he wouldn't have to coordinate schedules or compromise on menu items or worry about whether anyone was happy. The first one where he could do exactly what he wanted. He put the turkey in the oven at 10 a.m. It would take about 2.5 hours. While it cooked, he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and pulled up the file he'd been keeping on Corinne Mitchell. He'd added to it significantly over the past weeks. Beyond the lawsuit history and disciplinary record, he now had notes on her contractor behavior, on how she'd treated James Keller, on the failed inspection. He'd also added something new, a list of her neighbors. The Johnsons, who'd lived on the street for 6 years. The Patels, who'd been there for 8 years. Tom, who'd been there for maybe 4. Marcus had introduced himself to all of them in the past week, had subtle conversations about the neighborhood, had learned their stories. What he'd learned was that Corinne had been to each of them. The Johnsons said she'd come over to discuss their landscaping, which apparently violated neighborhood association guidelines about yard maintenance. The guidelines weren't strict, but Corinne had been very specific about how they weren't in compliance. The Patels said Corinne had noted that their mailbox post was leaning slightly and had offered to help them fix the structural issue, which seemed like an aggressive interpretation of a mailbox that was fine. Tom said Corinne had knocked on his door to mention that his truck was improperly parked, in a way that violated some interpretation of the county's code. She was doing it to everyone. She was the new neighbor who'd arrived and immediately begun cataloging violations, who'd identified problems, real or exaggerated, with every property on the block. She was a problem. And the worst part was, Marcus wasn't even sure if she knew she was doing it. If she believed, genuinely, that she was being helpful, that she was looking out for the neighborhood, that her constant attention to code and compliance was a public service. But he knew better. He knew that people like Corinne got something out of it, a sense of power, of superiority, of being right. The turkey finished cooking at 1 p.m. Marcus took it out of the oven, golden brown, perfect. He made gravy from the drippings. He reheated the sides, sweet potato casserole, stuffing, cranberry sauce he'd prepared the day before. He set a single place at his dining table, something he rarely did. Usually he ate standing up or at his desk, eating and working simultaneously. Today he sat down to eat. And as he ate turkey that was too much for one person, he thought about Corinne across the street, probably hosting family, probably being the hostess, probably talking about all the problems she'd identified in the neighborhood and how she was helping to maintain standards. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Hi Marcus, it's James Keller from JAK Electrical. I got a notice from the county that my work on Corinne Mitchell's house met code. I wanted to reach out and thank you for whatever you did. That inspection failure was going to hurt my business, and it was clear to me it wasn't my fault. I appreciate you setting the record straight." Marcus stared at the text for a long moment. He hadn't told James anything directly. James had somehow figured out that someone had intervened on his behalf. That someone had provided the county with information that cleared his name. Marcus typed back, "I'm glad it worked out. Your work is good. You shouldn't have been blamed for unreasonable demands." James responded, "If you ever need electrical work, call me. Free consultation." Marcus thanked him but didn't commit to anything. After dinner, Marcus went for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet. Families inside eating leftover turkey, watching football, existing in the privacy of their homes. Marcus walked past Corinne's house. Her driveway had 3 cars parked in it. Her car, another car he didn't recognize, and a third. Family, probably, people visiting for Thanksgiving. He could see through the front window. Lights on, movement, people laughing. Corinne was probably telling them about the neighborhood, about all the people who weren't maintaining their properties correctly, about all the ways she was helping to make the community better. She probably believed that completely. Marcus kept walking. He thought about the moment when Karen would realize that the failed inspection wasn't just a mistake, that someone had actively worked against her, that her perfect record, her winning streak with lawsuits, her reputation as a person who was always right, had been disrupted. He thought about the moment when she understood that there was someone willing to fight back. That moment hadn't come yet, but Marcus was patient. He was very, very patient. December came. Karen's house remained incomplete, the electrical violations unresected, the certificate of occupancy denied. The contractor visits had stopped. The project seemed to have stalled. Marcus watched from his window as Karen became increasingly visible around the neighborhood. More walks, more time outside, less activity in the house. She was suffering, he thought. The failed inspection, the money spent, the project incomplete, these things would be bothering her. A woman like Karen Mitchell didn't fail, didn't have incomplete projects, didn't have inspectors tell her that her standards were unreasonable. But she did now. In the second week of December, the police came to Marcus's house again. A different officer this time. Officer David Rothko, younger, maybe in his early 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd been doing this job long enough to be a little tired of it. "Mr. Chen," Officer Rothko asked when Marcus opened the door. "Yes," Marcus said. His stomach had dropped immediately, adrenaline flooding his system. "I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with your neighbor, Karen Mitchell." "What kind of interactions?" Marcus asked. "She's filed a complaint," Officer Rothko said. "She claims you've been monitoring her property, watching her movements, taking notes. She has concerns that you may be engaging in stalking behavior." Marcus felt his face go cold. "I haven't done any of that," he said. "Can I come in?" Officer Rothko asked. Marcus stepped aside. In his kitchen, Officer Rothko took out a notebook and asked Marcus to explain his relationship with Karen. Marcus told the truth, that she'd moved in, that she'd initially reported his charger to the police, that there had been a permit issue that had been resolved, that he'd had minimal interaction with her since. "She claims you've been taking notes about her," Officer Rothko said. "That you've been documenting her behavior, that you've been visiting contractors she's hired and asking questions about her." Marcus said nothing. He had done those things, but documenting someone's behavior and visiting contractors weren't illegal. Asking questions wasn't illegal. Learning about a neighbor wasn't stalking. But he understood what had happened. Karen had figured out that someone had intervened in her inspection, had somehow come to the conclusion that it was Marcus. And instead of accepting it, instead of moving past it, she decided to go on the offensive. She'd accused him of something worse than what he'd done, betting that the accusation itself would be enough to make him back off. "I haven't stalked anyone," Marcus said. "I had questions about electrical work and I asked a contractor. That's not illegal." "She's very concerned," Officer Rothko said. "She says you've been making her feel unsafe." "I haven't done anything to make her unsafe," Marcus said. "What I did was ask basic questions. That's not stalking. That's not criminal. That's just being interested in why she was trying to get me in trouble." Officer Rothko was quiet for a moment. "The thing is, Mr. Chen," he said finally, "stalking is about the perception of the victim. If she feels stalked, then we have to investigate. But so far, what you've described, asking contractors questions, documenting information that's publicly available, that's not stalking in any legal sense. So I'm going to note that there was a complaint, and I'm going to note your response, and unless something more concrete happens, that's probably the end of it." "But I should be warned," Officer Rothko continued, "that if she reports anything else, anything at all that you do, we will investigate, and if there's a pattern, it could escalate. So I'd recommend that you avoid any interactions with her going forward. Keep your distance. Don't visit her contractors. Don't ask questions about her. Just exist in your space and let her exist in hers." After Officer Rothko left, Marcus sat in his kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. Karen had accused him of stalking, had essentially weaponized his own investigation against him, had put him on notice that if he continued, there could be legal consequences. She'd lost the battle about his charger, she'd failed her inspection, but she'd found a new angle. She'd found a way to make him the villain. And she'd done it effectively enough that a police officer had been willing to warn him. Marcus understood in that moment that he'd made a strategic error. He'd been so focused on winning that he hadn't considered that Karen would fight back, and fight back in a way that involved the police, that involved laws about harassment and stalking, that involved making him the threat instead of her. He called Patricia, his lawyer. "This is not good," Patricia said after he explained the situation. "Not because you've technically done anything illegal, but because now you have a police report documenting a complaint. If she escalates, if she gets a protective order, that report will be used as evidence that there's a pattern of behavior." "What do I do?" Marcus asked. "You do nothing," Patricia said. "You don't contact her. You don't visit contractors she's hired. You don't take any further action against her. You exist in your space and you let her stew in her defeat. And if she tries to escalate, you call me immediately." "That's not satisfying," Marcus said. "No," Patricia agreed, "but it's legal, and right now legal is what matters." After he hung up, Marcus closed his laptop and put the file he'd been keeping on Karen into a folder and locked it away. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he understood, finally, the thing that Karen Mitchell had understood all along, that sometimes the person who's willing to make accusations is more powerful than the person who's right. That power in a neighborhood, in a community, often belongs to the person who's willing to call the police, who's willing to report violations, who's willing to make situations official. That authority came from being willing to weaponize rules and regulations and systems against other people. And Marcus had done the same thing, and Karen had simply turned it around. He spent the next week in a state of tense waiting. He didn't charge his car in the driveway. He plugged it in inside the garage, away from sight. He didn't interact with his neighbors. He went to the coffee shop and came home and worked from his office. He was invisible. Then on a Thursday evening, there was a knock on his door. Marcus looked through the peephole and saw Karen standing there, alone, holding a file folder. He opened the door cautiously. "Hi," Karen said. She looked tired. The aggressive confidence was gone. She just looked like a middle-aged woman who'd been through something. "Can I come in?" Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. In his kitchen, Karen sat at the table and opened the file folder. It contained photographs of Marcus driving past her house, of Marcus standing outside the electrician's office, of Marcus at the hardware store. She must have seen him there or followed him. They were photographs taken by someone with a telephoto lens, professional photographs. "I had a private investigator take these," Karen said. "After you started visiting the people I hired, after you started asking questions about me, I wanted documentation of your behavior." "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus asked. "Because," Karen said, and now her voice was sad in a way that surprised him, "I'm realizing that we're doing this all wrong." She pulled out another document, a cease and desist letter addressed to Marcus, warning him against further contact with her or her property or her contractors. "I can send this," Karen said. "I can file it with the police. I can escalate everything. And honestly, you'd probably recover. You'd probably convince people that you were just being curious, not actually stalking me. But it would be messy. It would involve lawyers. It would involve the legal system." Marcus said nothing. "Or," Karen continued, "we can both just stop. We can both agree that we're going to ignore each other, that we're going to exist on the same street without any further conflict." "Why would you do that?" Marcus asked. "Why not escalate?" "Because," Karen said, and she looked directly at him, and in her eyes he saw something broken. "I realized what I am, what I've become. A woman who comes into a neighborhood and immediately starts looking for things to be wrong with, who reports violations before she even knows her neighbors, who can't look at something without seeing the problems in it." She closed the file folder. "The inspector told me that my electrical violations happened because I was demanding things that weren't code compliant, that I knew better, that I'm a licensed electrician, and that I pushed the contractor to do things wrong anyway. He said I was essentially sabotaging my own renovation project because I was so fixated on a specific vision that I couldn't accept that the vision violated code." Marcus listened. "And I realized that's what I do," Karen said. "That's my pattern. I come into situations, I identify problems, I escalate them, I make them my problem to solve. And usually I create more problems in the process. I sue people, I report violations, I make people feel unsafe. And I tell myself I'm being helpful, being thorough, being a good citizen." "But you're not," Karen said. You're being a person who needs to win so badly that you'll hurt other people to do it. Karen stood up. I'm not sending the cease and desist, she said. I'm not escalating the complaint. I'm not going to do anything further. I'm just going to live in my house and fix my inspection violations, which I'll do correctly, and stop watching you and try to be less terrible. She walked to the door. But I want you to know, she said, turning back, that I know what you did. I know you somehow got the county to investigate my contractor's work. I know you somehow convinced them that the violations were my fault, not his. I don't know exactly how you did it, but I know it was you. I sent them information, Marcus said. I know, Karen said, and it was effective. It worked. You damaged my reputation and my contractors, and you made me look incompetent to the county. And honestly, you were pretty smart about it. Anonymous email, probably from a public network, information that was technically true but positioned in a way that made me look bad. She smiled, and there was something almost like respect in it. You're not as nice a person as you pretend to be, Karen said. You're just quieter about it. You do your damage behind the scenes instead of in people's faces. But we're the same, you and me. We both see problems. We both can't let them go. We both want to win. That's not true, Marcus said. It's a little bit true, Karen said. But here's the difference. I'm going to try to change that. I'm going to try to stop being this person. And you, well, you might want to think about what you're becoming if you don't. She left. Marcus stood in his kitchen for a long time after she was gone. And the thing that bothered him most wasn't that Karen had been right. It was that she'd probably actually change. People like Karen, people with the self-awareness to see what they were doing, often did change. They had the tools, therapy, medication, behavioral change, consciousness raising. They had the motivation, the pain they'd caused themselves and others finally catching up to them. And they had the skills to implement change because they were, fundamentally, skilled at everything they did, even self-improvement. Marcus, on the other hand, wasn't sure he would change. Because he didn't see himself as Karen had described. He saw himself as someone who'd simply defended himself, who'd investigated a threat, who'd taken information to the authorities. And yes, technically, he'd anonymously supplied information designed to discredit Karen. But he'd been responding to her action, not initiating conflict. Wasn't he? Or was Karen right? Was he simply more subtle about his aggressiveness? These were the questions that kept Marcus awake that night, and for many nights after. 2 weeks later, Marcus saw Karen at the hardware store. They made eye contact across an aisle of electrical supplies. She didn't say anything, didn't approach him, just nodded in a way that was respectful but distant. Then she selected something, a cable, some connectors, and went to the checkout. In the next weeks, Marcus noticed changes. Karen hired a new contractor, not JAK Electrical, but a different company, to finish her electrical violations. But she seemed less aggressive with them. He'd see them come and go without extended project timelines. She stopped knocking on neighbors' doors. She stopped walking past his house every day. She seemed to be doing what she'd said, just living in her house, existing on her street, trying to be less terrible. Marcus started charging his car in the driveway again. He continued his coffee shop routine. He continued his remote work. He continued his structured, predictable life. But something had changed. Something had been revealed. And unlike Karen, who seemed capable of actually changing what had been revealed, Marcus simply had to live with the knowledge of what he was. A person who was willing to hurt someone anonymously, without accountability. A person who was good at making problems for people quietly. A person who was, as Karen had said, not as nice as he pretended to be. The Tesla still charged every night. The charger still hummed. The light still turned green. And Marcus still watched it, feeling something cold in his chest that he didn't know how to name or how to fix. Marcus stood in his driveway on a Thursday afternoon in June, watching the moving truck pull away from Karen's house. She'd sold it 3 weeks ago to a young couple with 2 children. He'd watched the for sale sign go up, had watched the open houses come and go, had watched the sold sign go up. Karen had moved away. He didn't know where to, didn't know why. Had only heard through the grapevine from Tom, who'd mentioned it in passing, that she'd sold the house and relocated. She'd been in the neighborhood for 8 months. In that time, she'd reported his charger, demanded an inspection, failed her own inspection, been investigated by the county, and then apparently decided to start over somewhere else. Marcus thought about the last time he'd seen her, at the hardware store, that nod of acknowledgement, wondered if that moment had been the beginning of her decision to leave. She'd seen something in him, the willingness to retaliate, to operate in the shadows, to hurt people without accountability. And maybe she'd recognized it because she was capable of the same thing. And maybe she decided that a neighborhood that contained both of them was a neighborhood she didn't want to live in. His phone buzzed, an email notification. He pulled it out. The email was from a lawyer in Portland, Oregon. The subject line read, "Corinne Mitchell Professional Consultation." Marcus's first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. He opened it. The email was from a law firm that dealt with professional licensing disputes. They were requesting a consultation with Marcus about his knowledge and experience regarding electrical contractor licensing violations and county code enforcement. At the bottom, there was a name, Corinne Mitchell, as the referring client. Marcus stared at the email for a long time. She was in Portland. She'd set up a consultation with lawyers about licensing violations and code enforcement, which meant she wasn't just trying to change who she was. She was trying to become a professional in the field, to help other people navigate licensing issues, to turn her obsession with codes and violations into a career, to transform what she was into something that could be useful. And she'd apparently referred Marcus to them, which meant she'd told them about him, which meant she saw him as someone who understood how these systems worked. Which he supposed he did. Marcus deleted the email without responding. He looked at his Tesla, at his charger, at his house, at his life, which was exactly the same as it had been 6 months ago. Structured, predictable, safe. But also, he understood now, empty in a way that structure and predictability couldn't fix. Corinne had moved on, had tried to change, had moved to a new place and probably started the process of becoming a better version of herself. And Marcus was still standing in his driveway, watching his car charge, unable to move forward and unable to move back. The cable retracted into the wall unit with a soft click. The light turned from green to dark, and Marcus stood alone in his driveway as the sun moved lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty street. This 6-part cinematic narrative explores the collision between two people who are more similar than they'd like to admit. Marcus Chen, a man paralyzed by the need for safety and control, and Corinne Mitchell, a woman driven by the need to find problems and win conflicts. The story examines how systems, electrical codes, county regulations, police procedures, can be weaponized by people who understand them, how information can be used as a weapon, how neighborhoods become battlegrounds for people's need to be right and superior. The twist isn't that Corinne was bad and Marcus was good, or vice versa. It's that they were both participating in the same dynamic, using power, knowledge, information systems to hurt each other. The difference was only in method. Corinne was aggressive and overt, Marcus was quiet and covert. The resolution, Corinne's self-awareness and departure, suggests that change is possible for people willing to see themselves clearly. But it also suggests that change is difficult, and that not everyone is willing to do the work. Marcus's final isolation isn't a punishment so much as it is the inevitable result of his choices. He won the conflict with Corinne. But in winning, he learned something about himself he couldn't unknow, and that knowledge trapped him in a way that victory never could. The EV charger, the story's central symbol, represents the obsession with compliance and control that drives both characters. It's safe, it's legal eventually, it's efficient. But it's also what started everything. And in the end, despite being proven legal and correct, it remains a reminder of how easily conflict can escalate when two people who are fundamentally similar but opposed meet in a space with clear rules and high stakes.